This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Hello, everybody. First of all, we'd like to thank Miranda and Michael for inviting us along to the event. Really excited to be here. We'd also like to thank Madge for encouraging us to step outside our comfort zone and do something that we've not done before. Okay, right. Just going to give you a run through what we'll be talking about. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about us and the research that we've been doing. Then we're going to talk about the project that we're involved in a local area. We have devised models that we believe reflects sort of negative and positive models of dissemination of Black history. We're going to talk about controversy and then a bit about the sort of methods that we use in our workshop. As I said, we are students. We're both currently enrolled on a research master's in history. And my undergraduate research, I focused on the period of decolonization in Jamaica from 1944 into independence in 1962. My focus was on the political repression of the Rastafari movement throughout this period and just beyond. Repression was first instigated by British colonial authorities in response to the rise of Black nationalism and demands for self-government. Interestingly, despite having been targets for repression themselves, the new brown-skinned middle-class leaders in Jamaica, who had also been repressed, then took on continued and even escalated repression against the Rastas, which culminated in what became known as the Coral Garden Massacre in 1963. It was a dispute over land and access. To do this, we've engaged with archives and colonial office records and war office records, and explored how the issues of sort of race and colour and the stratification of Jamaican society meant that these new leaders failed to address these issues. And I incorporate some of the thesis of Louis Lindsay, who spoke about the myth of independence. Hannah's research.
Thank you. My name's Hannah John. I conducted my undergraduate research into the Morant Bay Rebellion in Jamaica in 1865 specifically, but I'm interested in protest history, specifically British and Caribbean protest history. I wrote my thesis basically looking at the similarities between the way that we understand protest in England and the way that we understand protest in the Caribbean, and more specifically about what legitimizes crowd action, and especially in Jamaica when the result of being part of crowd action is more than likely going to be death. What is it that people feel so strongly about that they're prepared to put their life on the line to fight for it? So that was my area of interest. I'm going to speak about how our roles as historians inform our role in the project. It's a history project that we run in St Paul's with the young people. And going to university as a mature student and learning all of these kind of things for the first time that I had a kind of basic understanding of, we quickly realised the difference in kind of academic historiography and what is understood in public history. And we were kind of concerned by the big difference in that, and we want to be part of making sure things that are happening in academia are then translated to the public. So the project that we're running is from 12 to 16-year-olds in St Paul's. It's a mixed ethnic group. Most of the children come from kind of working class backgrounds, and they all live in St Paul's. There's girls and boys. It's delivered as part of a wider I Am Me project, which is about kind of citizenship and positive self-identity. And our aim is to improve self-identity through discussions of Black history. It's quite important to us that we're kind of doing this work in St Paul's now, because the area is really struggling a lot with the rise of gentrification, and we've got lots and lots of people that have lived in the community for a long time that are kind of being pushed out of the community because they can't afford to live there. And because it's always been a hub of kind of Caribbean culture in Bristol, we're kind of concerned what happens to these kids when they're pushed out to kind of other areas.
Okay. Sorry, that's okay. Swapping, changing. Okay. Our negative model. This is what we believe is a negative model in the dissemination of Black history. Slavery, often the first introduction and the big, all it be out is slavery in Black history, which tends to ignore the fact that history began in Africa with the birth of, mankind and is the whole history. Sorry, that's my thing. Oh my God. No. It was the right current. For many of us, slavery, education came, we're talking, sort of good few, sort of 10, 20 years ago, and the be-all and end-all was to watch, the whole of the Roots series in school. Which begs you, leads you to ask about, what happened to all the rest of history, Black history, Black people's history the rest of the time. There's also the thing to consider that Black history doesn't include, often we talk about Black history and then we talk about Somali history and Asian history as if it's separate, which obviously begs the question of, should these histories be separated? It's all one history. You can't really talk about one without talking about the other. Focus on abolition. Again, the story of abolition, there's been lots of debate regarding abolition. Abolition is the British, tends to be the sort of forefront of British sort of Black history teaching. And there's lots of debates regarding to what extent it was a humanitarian versus an economic cause, which, made the British, attempt to abolish slavery and slave trading. The sole focus on the heroic and saintly actions of white British campaigners denies the agency of those that resisted and had a part to play in their own abolition. There is a domination of... Sorry. No, that wasn't meant to happen. I'm sure I fixed this earlier. The domination of American history. In our studies, with our research, we find that there's an overwhelming, domination of US history, which, obviously is good. We can draw lots of insights, but we tend to miss, the nuances of British sort of Black history in particular, and also missed opportunities for further research in Britain. Education, there's often the sort of notion that, schools should be responsible, for the dissemination of Black history, especially for the youth. But we have seen that, there's obvious limitations, both in our own experience of Black history and talking to many other people, up to date. There's a limitation with regards to the curriculum. And with regards to history teachers, although they may be well-meaning, once they've come out of sort of their own studies, you tend to then lose that connection to the latest developments in academia. Okay. Again, with us, having been students, we find that before we went to university, we also had a lot of the misconceptions that persist in our community with relation to Black history. This is often due to the slow transfer down from academia, down to, the public and, our children and people. Going to uni, we found that obviously there's a lot going on, and lots of things have been challenged in terms of challenging the overriding Eurocentric history. But unfortunately, it's just not being transferred down fast enough. And what this leads, all of these things lead towards this negative self-identity. And in terms of what we do with the youth, the youth workshops, we find that they say things like, phrases like, when we were slaves, or when we came to Britain as slaves. And so, they have these knowledge that they see themselves as, their first point in their history is as being slaves, which negates, obviously, the previous 1,000 years of British history, black history.
So this is kind of defining our terms and the way that we're working and what we kind of consider to be a positive model for black history. We encourage the young people to think about black history as kind of going all the way back to the origins of humanity, and black history is kind of human history, really, because even the term black history has kind of got a lot of issues around it. It's what is black history and what is, when all the histories are linked, it's a little bit of a strange way of putting it. And then also we encourage discussions and understandings of the impact that different acts of resistance had on kind of British policy and abolition itself, because we're trying to encourage the kids to be aware of the agency of black people throughout history. We also try to investigate and celebrate British black heroes, because it's, as much as there are lots of major contributions by American black people, we're kind of trying to get the children to look more locally at people in their community and the work that has been done, and also the kind of prominent black people that have been in this country for 1,000 years. We also feel that there's a big important part of having academic support in local history projects, in terms of having academics who are working with communities, so people are taking ownership and control of their own histories and their own kind of interpretations of history, rather than it's something coming from the outside. So, because also for us, our access to journals and discussions while we've been at university, if we drop out of academia, that will be something that's kind of shut off quite quickly from us, and then we're not in the same position to be able to discuss these things and try and disseminate them to the young people. Our aim in the project is to kind of create engaged, critical thinking citizens. So we don't kind of try and teach the young people while we're there. We try and create frameworks for discussion where they're able to come to their own conclusions and they're able to challenge things that we've said to them, and we try and encourage them to challenge their ways of thinking and where those came from. And we believe that this kind of model leads to a more positive self-identity.
Okay, Marcus Garvey. A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. This sums up exactly how we feel about the importance of knowing your past and knowing positive aspects of your history in order to feed into your confidence and positive self-identity. Controversy in history. In terms of presenting an alternative history, there's always going to be a controversy. I think you might have one of my cards. Thank you. There's always going to be a controversy. The whole idea is that when, any ideas that don't sit well within a sort of a national history or an established narrative is going to elicit controversy. The information on the website for this very event informed us about the Mail on Sunday's negative comment about the GCSE migration course, calling it pro-immigration propaganda, and also the Rhodes Must Fall campaign in Oxford by David Olusoga, who has courted a lot of controversy. Nationalist history it's long been used by modern societies in Europe to construct a national identity. But this is argued, it's exclusive and leaves a lot of people out, obviously tending to focus on moments of, heroism and pride. But this can be argued, it sort of contributes to sort of discrimination and, leaving out a lot of other people's history. historiography and history itself, it's about debate and it is about controversy. Somebody writes something in history and somebody else will come and challenge that and write an alternative version. And, the history of history is about, the sort of challenge and debating of history. Again, Black History Month, we've sort of touched on that. We, should there be a Black history, Black history, should there be a Black History Month? Arguably, it is a chance to focus on those stories that are often missed. But I think it tends to show that, we're still a long, long way from having it incorporated into all history. It should, it's all one history, it's all interrelated. It's world history, it's human history. And, there shouldn't really be any separations.
So the way that we run the sessions is that the sessions are young people led. So we are constantly collecting feedback on what they're interested in, what they're not interested in, what they'd like to cover, and we make sure that we kind of include them in all of the sessions. We've been encouraging kind of debating societies where the group will split off into two and they'll both have a point to argue, which kind of encourages them to vocalise what they're thinking. And also it's a good way to have a skill that you wouldn't usually learn in a state school. We've started the creation of a timeline where we put up a timeline and all the young people come and put their things that they're interested in. If it's something they know dates about, then they put it up. Otherwise, we'll help them do some research to find out what it is. But the kind of idea of the timeline is that we've taken it back into, further away from like slavery, so we can show them all this history that kind of came before that, and it's quite a good way for them to visualise what's happening. We do lots of games and role play and forums for discussion because they get bored if they're sat down, like everybody does, just listening to people talk. So it's all quite interactive because, some of them got very short attention spans and they let you know very quickly if they're not interested in what you're saying. And so we try, and if they are kind of getting disengaged, we kind of look at that as what are we doing that is not engaging them, and we'll try and plan for the next session to make sure that they're up and about a bit more. And I've had to put teaching in kind of commas because it's not really teaching, but we're kind of trying to relate everything to their experiences and things that they're going through. And not kind of trying to teach something from the outside. So we might start a debate on something and they'll go off on a tangent with it, but we see that as a way that they're expressing how their thought processes are working, and we kind of try and go with that as much as possible. And yeah, quite interactive sessions.
Okay. Okay, some of the topics that we have covered already in our sessions we've discussed how history is written, who writes history, and how, one book is one person's perspective, and, engaging with them to think more about, all the different viewpoints and to make their own decisions and, what fits for themselves and for their own identities. Again, should there be a Black History Month? We've debated this with the children and got them into groups and debated that and got some really good sort of feedback from them. Also, we debated whether we should use the word nigger in our community. Really interesting insights into that. The children sort of made the definition that, well, nigger's not nigger, and that, the use of it in hip-hop music is more of like a brotherly term. And so we traced back the origins of that word in showing that, it does derive from this word and the negative connotations with it. And these are the sort of things that we try to do, is to, track the historical origins of the things that we're dealing with now in our community, current issues that are affecting them now. We've also, for example, media representations. Our kids get a lot of negative media coverage. in the papers, drug dealers, gangsters and gangs, and we trace that back and we show them, back to anthropological studies of human, which attempted to, place the races in some sort of hierarchy so that they get to understand the, how the impact and the influence of these representations on themselves. So allowing them to, make more, have a more critical and understanding of how they can overcome these things. And of course, resistance history, always important, always, bringing back agency to black people in their own history.
So we've just got a few conclusions from, just to kind of sum it all up, where we're talking about the importance of including young people into discussions of black history, because it's about people creating their own history and their own interpretations of history and being active and participants in that. The importance of introducing young people to the use of primary sources, because for both of us, while we were doing our research, we actually found that the primary sources in the archives are actually quite liberating in terms of the things that you can talk about. You're not confined by the way that somebody else has interpreted them before, and you're able to draw your own conclusions. And we want to get across to the young people that the things that they're reading secondary literature is all other people's conclusions about something that they've read, and we really want to push them to do that themselves. The importance of dissemination of black history coming from within the community, so they feel that they're in a kind of safe environment where they're able to discuss things they couldn't discuss in school because it might be too controversial, they might get in trouble for using certain words. They're quite free and open to discuss whatever they want to discuss. And also that the positive model that we've kind of come up with, it's not just defined to black history, because, personally, I think world history is a much better way, human history, but actually that model would be just as good for addressing women's history or any other type of kind of hidden kind of, underground kind of history. So, that's what we've got to say.
That's us.